I think certain people came to the booth thinking there's free Prosecco or Franciacorta here today. We say it's non-alcoholic. They gave a pause and said, well, I'll try it.
Time for Wine Talks with Paul K.
Fascinating story.
This is Robert Mondavi from the Michael Mondavi Winery.
I taste a lot of wine.
Having a conversation with Shark Tank, Kevin O'Leary.
Michael Silacci, Opus One Winery.
Incredible conversation with Dr. Mia Ruth.
No matter what, you're definitely going to feel better.
Sit back and grab a glass. It's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. We are in studio today in beautiful Southern California, about to have a conversation with Marco Marano. Easy for you to say. Introductions in just a second. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you hang out with podcasting, and sponsored by the Original Wine of the Month Club, now sporting the Napa and Rosé series of wines. Hey, have a listen to Jessica Kogan. I was up in Napa Valley last week. Had an incredible conversation with one of the brightest women in this industry. We're talking about direct-to-consumer wine business, all things wine. Have a listen. She just came out. A fabulous, fabulous conversation. But not why we're here. We're here to have a conversation with Marco Marano. I already started that conversation, having a blast. Where we ran into each other walking down the aisle of the Fancy Food Show, which is it's a show my wife and I love, and we've only been doing it for about 10 years. But welcome to the show, first of all.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And what were you doing there? This is the Fancy Food Show for the listeners. Is this incredible food show that has wholesalers and retailers and manufacturers and suppliers of all things food. And so when you walk down the aisle, you start with cheese, and then you have mortadella, then you have spreadable salami, and then you have yogurt, and then you have Pepto-Bismol, and then you have. So tell me. By the way, what's the name of the company? What's the name of the brand?
Sure. My brand is a Prima Pave, and we are Italy's most awarded non-alcoholic wine. So we'll talk non-alcoholic wine today.
Prima
Pave.
Pave, and it's a non-alcoholic. It's not from Prosecco, so you call it just sparkling Italian.
We have three that we call our Blanc de Blanc, Rosé Brut, and Rosé Dolce, but it is a non-alcoholic sparkling wine.
And the reason that I had you come in, and the reason we started talking and had such a great conversation at the show was it is the best non-alcoholic wine that I've tasted, and I've tasted a lot.
Thank you.
So that
means a lot.
I got to get you in here and talk to you about
Thank
it.
you.
But we're going to go back to why you were at the Fancy Food Show.
Sure.
Why were you there? What were you doing in line booth there?
Sure. So we brought our team in to exhibit. We wanted to really present Prima Pave to the gourmet food and restaurant industry, bar industry, because we really wanted to change that paradigm of non-alcoholic wines. I think there's been a history of non-alcoholic wine, certainly in the United States. It's been produced for a couple decades now, but the focus on high-quality, interesting blends that are also de-alcoholized using more cutting-edge technology today, and a serious handcrafted approach to the wine making is something that is very new. And so we wanted to present that there. We've had the good fortune of having Prima Pave win over many somms and beverage directors and be carried at some Michelin-starred restaurants and James Beard awarded restaurants across the country. So we want to present that out there, and the reception was phenomenal.
So tell me then, just for the listeners, because it was like it wasn't like this before, but it was so hard to get a ticket. And I'm in the wine business. I've got all kinds of licenses to do whatever I want. And, they had to approve you and send in your ID and all this. Did they change all this? Because used to be like just show up almost.
It was our first show we exhibited in.
First time
However, we did know that this was a very, at least what was marketed to us to exhibit was that there would be 25,000 registered buyers only, not open to the public.
Okay, I get it now.
And so that was the largest food and beverage show in North America, around food innovation, 1,200 exhibitors.
Well, it's changed. It was in San Francisco all those years. It was 3 halls. No one wants to go to San Francisco anymore, and particularly there where Jacob Javis is, where Moscone is. It's like, no way you're going to walk. Just walking from the hotel would be dangerous. So we're glad I was in Vegas.
Yeah. It was easy for us here in Southern California.
And we saw a lot of alcohol things. There was a couple of for the listeners, there's some there's an area for French products looking for suppliers. There's an area for Spanish suppliers, and there was wine. There's some California wine, but this stopped us in our tracks. You were working the room, right? You were on. No, this
Yes.
is hard work. Everybody has to know that standing at a booth at a show is hard work.
Yeah.
To get your thing. And you're saying now, who was stopping at the booth to taste these things?
Well, you're absolutely right, Paul. I think we had in our original agenda to our team that, they would each have it was four of us, that they'd have an hour lunch break. And I think we snuck in 2 slices of pizza in 3 days that we gobbled at 3:00.
Yeah, right.
For 5 minutes. So it was very busy. As Paul said, the show is, even though there's all these buyers, you do have to be in the aisle to get their attention, and so that's what we were doing. And there was
how can you go hungry at a show like that?
Yeah, no, you certainly don't go hungry. I think certain people came to the booth thinking there's free prosecco or Franciacorta here
right.
today. We said it's non-alcoholic. They gave a pause and said, "Well, I'll try it,"
All right, all right.
And so it was phenomenal. We had certainly some direct gourmet large retailers come by the booth. So the Gelsons and Whole Foods and Bristol Farms, very interested in investing and building out their non-alcoholic, we'll call them non-alcoholic adult beverages, because again, non-alcoholic encompasses everything, but now we're speaking about non-alcoholic wine, beer, and spirits. And so they certainly came. Distributors who were in the gourmet food and wine space. There were also some restaurants and restaurant groups, some pretty big restaurant groups, as well as
I noticed that actually.
gift basket companies. There was a whole slew of people, and then just people who were exhibiting and just say, "Hey, I have a break here. I want to see what's going on," and come by and
That's why I actually started going to the shows, because we had gift baskets here. But I read an article after the show, and we'll get into this product right now, that said that the non-alcoholic segment, distilled spirits, which I don't frankly understand. This I get, but I don't understand, and we'll get into that in a second. But that was the number one category for the show, with the non-alcoholic wines and the non-alcoholic spirit replacements. So you went at the right time.
Yeah, it was.
But what got you there in the first place? I mean, how is it? You were just talking off camera that your father grows grapes in the Napoli region of Italy, which is southwest, almost halfway down, a little further. What? Like,
sure.
I saw you stand there, and you got the beard, and you look very Italian.
Thank you.
And which, by the way, there's a ton of Armenian vendors. I'm Armenian at the show that day, and I thought, this is an interesting product to be at the show. And then look at this guy; he kind of fits the part. So, what got you here in the first place?
And actually, our national key account manager lead is Armenian.
Is Armenian? Well,
she's based in New York. So my family heritage and my wife's family heritage, because we both really Prima Pave started with her pregnancy and her idea, but we come from a long line of hospitality and wine.
You stop, this whole idea was your wife's?
Absolutely.
And you're giving her credit for that?
And all that packaging was her idea too. No marketing firm. So
Jeez, what a good guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're both certified specialists of wine. We're both wine geeks at heart. We love wine, and a little bit different than some of the other brands in the space, non-alcoholic brands in the space. We are not teetotalers. We share that, that we do drink wine throughout the week. But my heritage, I'm a dual citizen with Italy, and my father's family hails from Avellino, Irpinia, wine country, where I have uncles and family members who both cultivated and grew grapes for some large, well-known producers of Campania wines, of Greco di Tufo and Fiano, but also made House Taurasi, House Greco di Tufo, House Coda di Volpe and Falanghina. And these were my first experiences with wine. We're going to Italy, having family meals, from the time I was basically 8, 9, 10, I certainly probably tasted wine before a soda. And I became accustomed to that, both how the grapes were grown, seeing that kind of go into the bottle in a rustic way. My wife's family and she was born here in California, has been here for many generations, and they actually also were involved with the wine industry in the Rancho Cucamonga AVA
Wow.
way back. One of the oldest, a lot of people forget, one
It
of
is
the oldest, the
where it
oldest.
started.
Yeah. And then from there, actually went into hospitality. So actually opened bars and different lounges in the area that were, for lack of a better word, in post-prohibition time, were places to go visit. And
I bet they were open during Prohibition. This is, I'll tell anybody.
so that was her family heritage in the hospitality industry. So we love wine. We have 2 other businesses that we founded that were focused on food and wine tourism to Europe specifically. And so when the pandemic hit, we were not going traveling anymore, not going out to eat in the lovely fine dining restaurants that we love to eat in, not going out wine tasting. Actually, the week before it was announced as a pandemic, we were actually up in Sonoma. So it was the weekend right before travel was stopped. So our last trip for a while was to wine country. And so once we were at home, we had the good fortune that my wife became pregnant with our child, our son Giacomo. But that became the triple whammy. There was no travel, no eating out.
Jeez.
And my wife was like, well, now I can't drink wine for about 20 months. And now what? So my attitude was, honey, I got this. I will find you something to imbibe to celebrate this time. And this was the summer of 2020. I basically ordered from e-commerce sites that had non-alcoholic wines, beers, spirits. There were just a handful of websites that did this and delivered. And many came broken, I think even the packaging was not very sophisticated for this at the time. And for about 2 months, so weekly, she would enjoy something. I would try these non-alcoholic wines alongside her. She loves bubbles. She loves Prosecco, Champagne, Franciacorta. Those are all her favorites. And we tried them. And after about 2 months of this, she looked at me candidly and said, stop ordering. Just, it's okay. And I had noticed, she didn't say anything, but I had noticed most were ending up in the sink. They were ending up down the drain. And
this is not a new industry. I've been tasting wine for 32 years, and it was a long time ago that I first tasted my first de-alcoholized wine.
Mm-hmm.
But what was the problem with these wines that you kept finding?
So for her palate, she has a dry palate when it comes to her wine, especially her wine, her bubbles. And there was certainly a sweetness, kind of overriding most of the products.
Like using sugar to hide the
added
lack
sugar,
of character.
Yep, added sugar, added juices, added extracts, things that weren't even grape based, or adding different flavor profiles to it. Some were syrupy, some had a very strange mouthfeel and texture. And so after a while, and certainly with our upbringing, we think of wine a lot of times in terms of food and how do you enjoy a bottle with a nice meal. And most were not complimenting the food at all. It's kind of overpowering it or taking away from it. So
it
she
could have
just
been
said,
made to pair with anything.
no,
right?
I certainly don't think that was ever in the discussion. A lot of that was leftover grapes, kind of going through a big commercial dealcoholization process. And she looked at me and said, so this is what a mother-to-be has to look forward to, just kind of disappointed. That was her sentence to me. And it was the spark of Prima Pavè and the idea, but it certainly was still nothing, I would say, even where it is here today, sitting 2 years later. At that time, we reached out, our first step was we reached out to winemakers to even see winemakers that we had gotten to know over the years in Italy and Spain and France and Portugal and Greece even, to see if there was any interest in this. And, maybe that was a little bit of the naivete thinking.
You're asking a winemaker.
Yeah, winemakers that are really focused on,
Like, really, seriously?
Yeah, try to, have a stellar year and stand out vintage and, earn their points out there. And most just scoffed at the idea. They said, no, you can't make a good de-alcoholized wine. You can't make a good non-alcoholic wine. No way. And so what ended up happening was through 3 contacts remove. It was a winemaker that we knew well, referred us to another one, referred us to another one. It was kind of 3 degrees removed, and we met a gentleman up in northern Italy, in Trento, and younger, kind of more progressive, forward thinking, and what could be done, also willing to experiment.
Yeah, right.
And at the same time, there was a newer dealcoholization technology coming out that we were very interested in trying, as far as, because again, we didn't think kind of the existing ones were doing justice, especially when it came to mouthfeel, texture. That's really where we thought it was lacking. And so that began the process. We like to say Dijon had back-to-back babies, because Giacomo was born in March 21 and Prima Pave was born in January 22, 9 months later.
That was pretty quick work. Let me just stop for a second. I mean, to think of this, and 2 years later to be not only have a product in the bottle, which is nice as this is, but to be actually marketing it on the street, have enough inventory to sell, to have it here, that was really quick work on your part.
Thank you. I think
your wife must have been really thirsty.
she was. Yeah, I mean, her whole pregnancy, we basically had samples shipped from Italy to Los Angeles, and we're trying them. And it was actually a very interesting process, because, as you know, I say, wine geek, certified specialist of wine, our mind immediately took us to some varietals and blends that we thought would work. And that was the educational lesson to us, where we were naive, because you have to understand what's going to hold up after dealcoholization, which is not where you're originally thinking. We're in this very Italian-centric, Appalachian-focused mindset. And, of course, we're going to Friuli for our white varietals, so we have to bring in a Schiava or a Teroldego. And you come to the end of the dealcoholization process, you say, well, that didn't add anything to it. There's nothing there that changed. So that was part of the fun. In essence, it was a blank canvas. You have to think completely differently. And for example, with us, our red varietals, we went to central Italy. We found Montepulciano d'Abruzzo was the red that held up for us after dealcoholization. Needed more body, needed more oomph behind acid, it. Yeah, sure. If not, it just became nothing after dealcoholizing. So
how does, let's talk about that for a second, because like I said, years and years and years ago, and I was desperately seeking the brand in my mind while we were talking, first came out, and way before the consciousness of the millennials and the Gen Zs about dealcoholized products in general, like cocktails now, which we have to touch on that, because I just don't understand it. But this is now there's sort of a consciousness about alcohol. There's sort of a consciousness about being healthy. There's sort of a consciousness about calories and alcohol. I personally, I'm like, particularly with the cocktails, they don't taste anything like the cocktail I wanted, and I'm not sure why I would bother. For instance, there was a bottler in Paso Robles that used to make white Zinfandel juice. And it was Vitis vinifera Zinfandel, and grapes want to ferment on their own. If you just leave them alone, which is probably how wine was discovered in the first place, they're going to ferment. They have their own yeast. And so he said that the challenge to making just grape juice from wine grapes was stopping it from fermenting. So it became more expensive for him to bottle this juice than it was the wine. So he stopped making it, which is unfortunate. My kids love taking the cork out and all that kind of stuff. So in this process, all the processes up until what I tasted at the show left much to be desired. And you had a really good point about texture is such an important part of wine. Is this part of this new process? And how did you find it? Is just guy just happened to know about it? And why does it work?
Sure. So to your point, there's verjus, there's other things that are grape juice, or the fermentation stop. We felt strongly that it was all about how do you dealcoholize with the lowest intervention possible. We thought that was the key to making a good product. But taking the grapes and going through the full fermentation process and vinification process as you would in a traditional wine, we thought that's really important, because to your point, then it resembles juice, or resembles something that isn't wine. And so we started with that. We say, okay, let's take for example, in our Blanc de Blanc, our Gewürztraminer Pinot Grigio and our Sauvignon Blanc, that we all harvest.
Says no one ever.
Yeah, it's all from Friuli. And that's where we believe they make the best expressions of that. So we start with the finest grapes. We make the still what we call a still rare white blend. As you said, it's not common.
Is this regular ripeness, or do you have to pick at a different time?
No, regular ripeness. The still white alcoholic wine that is made is delicious. You can drink it on its own, and it's phenomenal. The point there is really starting with a fine wine first, and then really taking that alcohol out slowly. And that for us was the key. When you have very high heat for an extended period of time, we felt it destroyed a lot. Or if you were putting things into spinning cones where you're basically pulling apart all the compounds and then trying to put it back together, we felt that lost 90% of the essence.
What's the name of that process?
So that's spinning cone.
Oh,
that's a spinning cone. There's other ones like vacuum distillation. So ours is it's more labor intensive. It's certainly, and I think to some of the education out there, some people say, how are these non-alc wines or non-alc spirits priced more than the alcoholic versions?
Good point.
You share with them and they understand there's another 2 processes added on to traditional winemaking that are all by hand, very involved processes that are also technology driven, right? So they understand. We try to still give a beautiful experience around 24 a bottle that we feel, achieves that.
That's both, retail.
Yeah, in the bottle, around the bottle, the packaging, and the quality in there. All of our wines have won medals at major wine competitions. So we
judge them in the non-alcoholic, obviously, against each other.
They do. They do. Okay. So this year or last year's competitions that focus on it are the IWSC in London, the International Wine Spirits Competition, the San Francisco International Wine Competition, and last year was the biggest entry field ever. A couple of years ago was maybe 3 brands, but now every brand wants to win a medal in there. So it's sophisticated. They have people who are wine people judging, beer people judging the non-alc beers.
Do you think this is then, now that this is getting kind of accolades, do you think this is a substitute, like in your wife's case, for the times that you're not allowed to, during pregnancy, for instance, or any other time that somebody might be ill? Like when my dad was ill with his cancer, he wasn't drinking his martinis, which was very unfortunate. Or that this becomes a beverage of choice no matter what.
Sure. Well, there's many different, we get emails every day from different people and direct messages on social media that certainly the pregnancy, I think there's a lot of women out there that gravitate to Dijaud's story and say, I'm pregnant, I want to celebrate, this is amazing. And there's 0.0% ABV, which is a big distinction.
Yes.
It's difficult to do it well because legally here you can have up to 0.5% alcohol and it could still be called non-alcoholic wine, right? And ours is 0.0, and that was very important to Dijaud, as it was founded during a pregnancy, and women will give a pause many times if there's even a smidgen of trace alcohol. So there's certainly that group, but we have many that are just like myself, now turned 40 this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I know, it's a Tuesday night, and I know, my son Giacomo's gonna be up at 6:45, 7, and it's we're eating something delicious. I don't want to just have, Pellegrino. I don't want to have juice on it, and so we open up a bottle of Prima Privé because it stands up to oysters or ceviche or a shrimp scampi if we're making it, or a pasta. That. So that's really for me. It's that during the week, trying to understand this phase of my life, health, metabolism slows at 40. I know what my mornings look like, running businesses and having a 22-month-old. So it's certainly having a quality product there.
That's an interesting point that you made, because my approach to low alcohol wines, low carb, whatever they want to pitch, which is, I think, a bunch of horse hockey in general, is that most people, or most of them, you have to muscle them down in order to not enjoy them. You won't enjoy them, but you have to muscle them down to feel like whatever you're doing. And I don't consider wine a beverage of health. It's not a health beverage. It can be healthy if you drink it in moderation and you do what your doctor tells you to do. I'm not a doctor, but it's not something you would take like a protein shake because you're trying to do something specific. And here is a brilliant product that feels like, tastes like, sparkles like good wine, gives you the impression of good wine, and can replace a good wine when the times are needed.
That's right.
And if you decide that you're not, like I have lots of friends that don't drink, which is hard. They don't keep me in business, but they want to enjoy it instead of a Diet Coke. They can feel like they're partaking in the festivities, as it were.
Sure, and that's a great point, Paul, because there's I'm gonna say two different sides to the non-alc adult beverage movement right now. There is this side that is trying to make you feel a buzz, quote unquote, without the alcohol.
Psychosomatic buzz.
Right. So it's things like adaptogenics and I probably don't even say it right. Nootropics, things like that. And there's that work being done there, CBD infused things. So that's that group. And then there's, I'd say, the other side, which is just removing the alcohol, having a very natural product, and not very difficult to understand type of product. And I think the beers have kind of been leading the way in that realm. If you still look at the tremendous growth in this industry, I think it's around 70% is still non-alc beer sales. But the fastest growing two are the non-alc spirits and wine, because they have a lot of room, to grow still. But certainly, I just got off the phone yesterday with the wine distributor, and I think this is also very interesting at the times. Last year, a traditional fine wine and beer and spirits distributor didn't even want to have a conversation about carrying a non-alc wine in their portfolio, and this year that's completely changed. Wow. With the big players, the traditional wine distributors saying, I want one or two really good SKUs that I can tell a story about.
Because the bars are asking and the restaurants are asking.
Exactly. Right. But just then, it was a sales rep saying, my father, he has diabetes, he has to stop drinking. She's a wine sales distributor rep. So there's a whole host of reasons. But
so when you got to that point, and we won't discuss the actual process, but you got to this point where you got a product, you designed a package. I suppose you don't need TTB approval for this.
No, it's actually all regulated. Yeah, that's interesting. It's
very fascinating.
So here's where it gets complicated. I actually just worked through this regulatory process this week, so it's fresh in my mind.
We're pros at it.
So the labeling and everything when it comes to a non-alc or de-alcoholized wine is actually regulated by the FDA, like food.
Yeah, right.
So you have to adhere to FDA, which is why you see on the label, grams of sugar, carbohydrates. You're presenting things as you would a food product. However, there are certain states that still consider a de-alcoholized wine alcohol.
I can see that.
And this was the experience this week with the
Tennessee or Missouri or which one?
Not Tennessee, not North Carolina, but actually South Carolina.
Yeah, okay, that's another one.
But they were nothing more than accommodating, really trying to take us through the process because it's complicated.
Yes.
It's an alcohol for their purposes of how it's classified. There's an excise tax on it. However, there isn't colas as you would have in labeling under TTB because it's under FDA.
Right.
So everyone's kind of learning, as you go. But there's still the state level.
When they didn't repeal prohibition, because it was never repealed, it was just given to the states. I'm sure the idea of non-alcohol wine wasn't even considered an option. Or I would do that.
Right.
So when in your findings through the research of doing this, I'm sure you went through many iterations. What did you find that alcohol brought to a bottle of wine that, when removed, was hard to either replace or fake?
Sure. So, and from our perspective, we're not trying to add anything. We don't add chemicals, extracts to emulate aromas, no sugar added. The fundamental difficult part, which ours will never be, let's say, like a Prosecco in this way, is the aromas, because at the end of the day, alcohol transports aromas to your nose. So that's that was a decision for us to say, can we get to a really good point at that, but still be 0.0% ABV? And it was a compromise, right? Because we didn't want to add anything that was not.
I think that's okay. You're not going to swirl and sniff this,
right? But that's why also with sparkling, there's a component to that. But again, do I feel there's a long way to go in the quality of still reds or still white non-alcoholic? Yeah, I think the technology needs to improve quite a bit to get closer. This is why we only specialize in sparkling currently.
Well, that was smart.
Yeah. But
So you have
I think we'll get there
Blanc de Blanc.
eventually.
I see two basically different rosés here.
Sure, I brought the 2 rosés today. So we have our Blanc de Blanc, as I mentioned, is the Gewürztraminer Pinot Grigio Sauvignon Blanc blend. Our Rosé Brut is the same white varietals with the introduction of Montepulciano d'Abruzzo. And then the Rosé Dolce is also the same blend as the Brut, just there's more residual sugar left in the fermentation
And
process.
the bubbles are Charmat added.
Correct. Added after. So, of course, yeah, there's no fermentation. So we do have to add carbonation, at the very end. That's actually the last part of our process. But it's really careful because that's part of that mouthfeel. That's part of having those fine bubbles and persistent bubbles. And we really want that to be the case. So ours are, we say 5 days open if they're properly stopped, with the stopper in the fridge is nice.
What's the...
Yeah, but they are also shelf stable, from that standpoint, and so it's
So with the FDA, you had to go through shelf stability, mold, all the different bacteria tests.
sure.
Interesting?
You give approval to say this is a registered facility in Italy, so. When you say that and you have the registration number, you're basically saying at any point someone from the FDA can hop on a plane and go check it out.
Yeah, right.
On your dime.
Yeah, right. Of course.
Yeah, on your dime. So, and that's fine, But again, I think it is a good thing because at the end of the day, it is speaking to a health conscious consumer in many ways. Not everyone. Some it's about moderation, but like you said, if someone's dealing with diabetes, if someone is pregnant, you want to have that level of assurance in what's being put on that bottle, I think, for that group.
What we noticed at the show is that 2 years ago, last time they had it, which was before COVID, right? So almost 3 years ago, that organic, biodynamic, that was the theme of the day. And I didn't see as much. It was almost the de facto standard at the show this time around, hardly being pitched. But do you think there's going to be a segment of this in the future where it's organic or biodynamic?
Sure, and there are some non-alc wines currently on the market that are. The issue in Italy, and now this is you're getting at the country level, is that in Italy, any non-alcoholic produced product is actually not considered organic. Currently, you cannot call it organic, but you can, for example, from Spain or France.
Wow, that's interesting.
Then you deal, but I think that's changing.
Yeah.
We're going to see that probably change in Italy over the next year. We're hopeful for that. But no, I think that, again, it speaks to, depending on the segment, there's a segment that really cares about that being labeled and certified a certain way. We say, of course, currently all of our grapes are sustainably farmed. That's important to us, that there's no exploitation of the grapes.
Exploitation of the grapes.
Yes, that's. We were asked that recently by a beverage director. Yeah,
that's a great term.
Yeah. So that's what we try to do now. But obviously, again, this is a learning process for countries, for regulators. How it can be labeled.
Are you excited about that?
It's exciting. I don't know if this will. I don't know if it'll always be under the FDA. I think that's another question because we're seeing, again, certain states say this is alcohol.
I wonder if the cocktail are under the same. I guess it would be, right?
It would be,
because these are typically cocktails. Let's jump into that subject.
Sure.
In the last 10 minutes or so.
Sure.
Typically, cocktails. The mock cocktails are not de-alcoholized bourbon, right? That'd be stupid.
I think right now there's a big trend towards that too.
Yeah. So the ones I tasted at the show were sort of Indian spiced things, and I did not get it, particularly when you tasted them without their preferred mixer. So they had some where if you added tonic, or if you added soda, or if you added something else, then it became this cocktail. And those were brought to me here through the main wholesaler, a pretty big wholesaler. But then the other day at Whole Foods, I saw the un-gin, un-whiskey, and it was $17 for a $3.75 or half bottle. That means $34 for a full bottle, which means on the wholesale side, some bar is going to pay about the same they would pay for a bottle of Hendrick's or a bottle of medium range bourbon. And if you make a cocktail from that, you're going to have to charge something similar because you're trying to get your money back, and that's where the margins are. And I thought, what? I'm like, why? Why don't I just drink a soda water with a lime in it or something? Huh?
Yeah, no, that's.
Does it make any sense?
It's certainly
I get. I don't get that.
It's certainly there are guests who focus on cocktails who don't drink wine or they don't drink beer.
Yeah.
We all drink wine here on this show, but there's
Well, I
a group that
suppose that's
says
it.
no, and so they say, I'm going out for the same reason. I want that feeling. I want that feeling. I want the ritual of the bartender making me an elevated cocktail. How much those alcohol-free spirits emulate or taste like the alcoholic version, I can't speak to that. I'm not a big consumer of them, but there is certainly that culture growing in the fine dining space. Prima Pavée is served by the glass and by the bottle. I think the other day I saw there was actually a restaurant in New York that has this on the menu at $55 a bottle, which
that's
in
twice
my mind
retail.
was,
Almost a little more
and
than
so
that. That's not unusual.
but the zero proof cocktails, to your point, you're rarely going to see them under 13 or 14 a cocktail. Just because, like you said, the ingredients, the cost of what's going into them, is very high at that.
There's a huge
point.
trend right now. It's clear that millennials aren't drinking as much wine. It's clear that Gen Zers are drinking other things. I had this joke that I particularly have with organic farmers and organic winemakers, which is, we talk about sustainability, organic farming, biodynamic farming. There's a whole bunch of other organizations in Europe that purport natural wine, so to speak, unquote, unquote. But those same people that want those things to happen are drinking White Claw and this other garbage, which this is superior to, and it looks real. It looks real and doesn't have phony flavors in it. And I still believe that there's something about a glass of wine, and you're being a wine person, that eventually, even though it's like real estate, it always goes up and down, but the trend's always upward, that eventually that somebody has a decent glass of wine in their hand goes, oh yeah, I get it. I'm not going to drink this other stuff. I'm not going to drink these fake cocktails or whatever. But this has that potential in its character to feel like I'm having a good glass of wine.
Yes.
And that's what was so fascinating about it when I walked down the aisle and you stopped me. And you started with this 0.0 ABV thing.
Yeah, that's right. I think I saw a raised eyebrow, which fair enough. But you're right. It's there is the presentation does matter, and it's why we were at the fancy food show with flutes and presenting a certain way.
Yeah.
Whether that's
right. You did have flutes,
right, and it. But again, there's a whole other segment that is a kind of grab and go canned type of experience or pre-made, pre-mixed group. I think, to your point, where Gen Z goes is kind of a moving target, because I think there's part that sees this there's certain products and certain things we want to move away from a health and wellness standpoint, and want to know where certain things come from. But then they're also very open-minded to try things, like I said, that I can't even pronounce, right? So they're a dichotomy in that way. They're kind of risk-taking on one side, and on another side, if it includes any of those words, they're not going to buy it.
Right.
So
it's the wine industry in itself, at least the direct-to-consumer side of it and the internet side of sales, is really in quite a flux. They really don't know what's happening. The other night I had dinner with a couple that owns a restaurant here in Pasadena, gorgeous restaurant. They just are getting out of it because their pre-mixed bottled cocktails seem to be taking off. And this is full-on gin, bourbon, scotch, Manhattans, old fashions, etc. Very classy group of packaging. I mean, the bottles are octagonal, they're dark, they have a wonderful sort of old school looking label. I haven't had a chance to taste them. I brought them home. I'm going to probably pour one tonight. But any movement towards cans or half bottles or 187s with this product?
So we were actually at the fancy food show. Part of what we're doing was releasing our 200 milliliter mini bottle.
Oh, you're going to go you're not going to go to traditional sizes. You're going to make up your own 200.
200, and that was also because we were actually constrained with some of what has to go through the dealcoholization process, the actual weight of the glass to stand up to certain things. So, but they're pretty. We tried to emulate as much as we could the 750s, but even in that process, it became certain things that it was a compromise we had to make.
Right,
This
sure.
is beautifully with a cork and cage, just how you would. But with the 200s, we had to go to a bottle cap. There was no other way.
Crown cap.
From crown cap to do it. But the reception at the show was still phenomenal.
Yeah.
I think it was still this glass. It feels nice. It's a beautiful label. People appreciated, that, and it wasn't, the can, which is a different feel. Was it not cork? There wasn't the cork. Hopefully we'll get there soon with being able to do it on the little ones. But that's, also adapting to the market and understanding usage. And, if it's going to be in a mini bar, if it's going to be in a spa, having a small size matters. On the same hand, we've had conversations with retailers that say they just started trying hard kombuchas in small formats, and college
Hard
kids were
kombucha?
hard kombuchas.
Who came up with that?
I don't know. I know one company. This is called June Shine in San
Oh my
Diego or
God.
something. But this notion of kind of a grab and go, college going out and having a picnic with a can of wine, a hard kombucha, small format, and ultimately, as much as I come from a very traditional wine background, understanding what the next generation wants in the packaging and how they use it and how they consume it, I think is important for everyone, because otherwise there's going to be a generation just lost, and especially on the wine. Eric Asimov just wrote a wonderful article last week about this exact topic.
I got to read it.
And saying there's a bit of a crisis in the wine industry reaching,
It's a huge crisis.
the younger millennial and Gen Z crowd. So,
Well, the problem in general with this, well, first of all, I don't think there's any problem with a crown cap on a small bottle, because who's going to recap it anyway? I see many 750s with crown caps that come through here, which I think is a mistake, because unless you're using a regular champagne closure, a reclosure, which not everybody has. But when I took the Master of Wine entrance exam, which in itself is a funny story, but the one essay question I did get, which there are actually three of the questions. You can choose one. They are left over from the previous year's Master of Wine test. So if you pass, so I thought it's pretty cool if I can answer this question. One of them was about wine and closures. Do we keep up with what's going on in the marketplace, Tetra Paks and cans, etc.? And I wrote this interesting article. They did not care for my tasting notes, and there's a reason for that, but they liked the article that I wrote because I happened to be involved with my Uncle Art, who passed away not too long ago, but he was the inventor of the spoon straw and the flexi straws, and also had invented a machine for Coca-Cola to assemble fake cork, synthetic cork in the 80s.
Oh, wow.
In the 80s.
Wow.
To a crown cap for Taylor Sellers bar cap magnums. So we all thought those were cork, but they actually were fake cork, and he invented the machine that assembled them. So there is a responsibility, I think, to the winemakers in the wineries and the manufacturers to figure that out, unless we're just stalwart with the concept of a cork and pulling it out and that whole romantic part of the process. But the reason I think the MW people liked my answer was because at that week, a young man approached me saying, I'm trying to buy some bottles. I want some interesting bottle shapes like the ones you have. And I want a cork finish because I'm making a CBD drink. And we want them to have that experience of uncorking the romantic part of it. I'm not sure it carries the same connotation to open a CBD drink that way, but, it was an interesting thought. They were thinking through it. So, but what I've noticed, and I do this every year, I look for 5 canned wines that I like. And they're steadily and dramatically improving. 5 years ago when I started doing it, it tasted like leftover, over sulfured, whatever they put in a can. No one cares what's in a can. Last time out, appellated Pinot Noir, vintage Cabernet, some California, some Lodi, some, Central Coast. It was pretty interesting. And I had the opportunity to taste the bottled version side by side with the can, and they're different.
how were they different for you?
Less body, leaner, a little more acidic, a little subdued fruit. Mm-hmm. You could tell they were the same, but there was just nuances were different. Mm-hmm. So, this has been fascinating. So glad you came in. We're already on 45 minutes.
Sure. was a
And
pleasure.
I wish you
being
all the
here.
luck. You have representation in Southern California right now?
So in Southern California, we are currently self-distributing. We're headquartered here. We just signed up in the last 2 weeks traditional distributors in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, the
Well, good
Carolinas,
markets,
Tennessee. New York is kind of funny because we have a lot of direct relationships with well-noted restaurants and world's 50 best bars, because New York City does not allow traditional alcohol distributors to distribute non-alcoholic. So it's actually, I think, one of the only states left doing that. But so, we're all kind of working through that, but certainly are having conversations in California currently. And I think the other thing that's interesting here is there's the traditional distributors of wine, but this also opens up the door to traditional distributors of gourmet food.
Sure. Yeah, well,
And it becomes you kind of can go either way or both ways.
but when you said that about New York, I mean, the salespeople out in the street that are going to the places that you want to be in, that are selling wine and liquor, and they can't be in their sales pitch. You got to go to the food people to do that.
They can. And actually, it's technically, if you are an establishment that exclusively sells alcohol, you cannot sell non-alcoholic wine either. So if you are a fine wine shop in New York City, you cannot carry
I wonder what that logic was about way
non-alcoholic
back
wine.
when.
But if you walk into, Gristedes, a supermarket, they can carry non-alcoholic wine. So
Yeah, because like Whole Foods in Upper West Side, there's their liquor store or wine shop is same wall. It shares a wall, but it's a totally different.
it's just like Trader
entrance.
Joe's. Yeah, exactly.
You can't go in,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it just doesn't make any sense. And you wonder sometimes about these archaic alcohol laws that were really seriously, when Prohibition was defederalized, really, it just became a state issue, and everybody created 50 alcohol prohibitions. And there's some really crazy logic in that, but
So I believe there's one. There was actually a very big ruling last summer in New York about this, and kind of a lot of letters went out, and don't do this again or you'll be fined kind of
there's a lot of that
situation.
stuff.
But on the same hand, there were some workarounds, and you saw some of the traditional distributors have to create a whole new company name, have trucks with the whole new logo, whole new name that is only doing non-alcoholic. So
see, when you get stuck in the bureaucracy is not going to change itself because it's not worth the headache.
Yeah.
So just live with it is what it comes down to.
Exactly.
We just got a cease and desist letter and a fine from, I think it was North Carolina, either north or south, because the wine limit is 24 bottles per address per person. Now, if you live with your wife or boyfriend or girlfriend, that person can order 24 bottles too, but one person can't order more than 24 bottles. It slipped by our system. This is like last year, maybe. We just got the receipt. Just got the invoice a few weeks ago. We shipped 2 extra bottles to this guy, and we're being fined $500. And so now we're looking for somebody that might live in the house with him to see if we can move those wine over to
the household.
But I got to spend a lot of time doing this. It's not that easy anyway. It's great having you. It
was wonderful,
luck
Paul.
out there.
Thank you.
I'd love to have you keep tabs on what you're doing and where it's
course.
going. And if you need any help with people to talk to that might help you distribute this, we have obviously tons of contacts over the years.
Appreciate
Happy
that.
to turn you on to somebody.
Appreciate that, Paul.
Cheers.
I'll take you up on that.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.